"I became wet immediately I saw him," said Dion. The seat was too tight, the air too dry. Dion hated flying, but it was cheaper than therapy. She adjusted her curls with one hand, clutching her phone with the other, and stopped short. The window seat, the one she paid extra for, was already taken. He was already there, tall, quiet, broad chest beneath a black shirt. His head down, eyes on a book. Muscular forearms flexed along the armrest. A silent wall of calm. He looked up. Just a glance. Gray eyes. Cool. Focused. No smile. No words. Just a small shift so she could pass. "Thanks," she said, sliding in. No response. She buckled in, trying not to stare. But her body knew before her mind did. This man had her full attention. Dion opened a book but couldn't focus. Every shift he made, every breath, every quiet sigh, her eyes followed. He wasn't trying to be noticed. No cologne, no flash, just presence. When the turbulence hit, the cabin lights flickered. Her hand gripped the armrest. "You okay?" he asked, voice low and steady. She glanced at him. "I hate flying," she admitted. His lips barely moved. Then sleep through it. Another jolt. Her body leaned, and her head landed on his shoulder. She froze. He didn't move, didn't shrug, didn't shift. He just let her stay. Warmth spread through her, and for once, she let herself rest. She woke up slowly. His arm was still there, still steady. She blinked, disoriented for a second, then sat up. "Sorry," she whispered. He turned his head, eyes unreadable. "It's all right," he said. Just that. Nothing else. But the way he said it, calm, sure, made her stomach twist. She tucked a curl behind her ear, searching for her voice. "I'm Dion." He hesitated, then reached out his hand. Dallas. Simple. Direct. No questions. No flirting. His fingers were warm. His grip firm. She held on to that name as the plane began its descent. Dallas. They didn't exchange numbers. No social handles. No promises. But as Dion walked off that plane, she glanced back one last time. He was still seated, watching her go. Her chest tightened, not from regret, but from the quiet pull of something she couldn't name yet. Would you fall for someone whose name you didn't even know, just from how they made you feel? If you've ever felt that instant spark, tell us in the comments. Like and subscribe to hear how Dion's story unfolds, only here on Mr. Peterson Long Stories. Dion was already annoyed before boarding. Her morning had started with a missed alarm, a frantic ride through traffic, and a coffee spill across her cream blouse. She had changed into the only spare shirt in her bag, a soft lilac top that didn't match her black slacks, and she hated looking anything less than put together. The last straw. The airline had switched her seat from the window to the aisle. She had paid extra for that little square of glass. She liked watching the ground shrink beneath her, liked pressing her head against the wall, shutting out the world. Instead, she was left with 14A, a spot in the middle of the row, boxed in by strangers. By the time she reached her row, she was tired, irritated, and tempted to snap at the flight attendant. But then she saw him. He was already in the window seat, and for a moment, her frustration melted into something else entirely. The man was impossible to ignore. His build filled the narrow seat like it was never designed for someone like him. A plain black t-shirt stretched across broad shoulders, fitting too, perfectly over the kind of chest sculpted by discipline, not vanity. His arms rested against the armrests, muscles flexing faintly as he adjusted a paperback book in his hands. He didn't notice her at first. His head was down, jaw sharp, faint stubble shadowing his face. He read quietly, as though the world outside the page didn't exist. Dion froze in the aisle, hand still gripping her carry-on strap. For a second, she forgot about her ruined morning, forgot about the lousy seat. All she saw was him. He finally glanced up. Gray eyes, steady, unreadable. They didn't linger long, didn't hold her captive in the way most men's stares tried to. Instead, they skimmed across her with the same calm he gave everything else, and then, just like that, back to his book. But in that half-second, Dion felt something shift inside her. She cleared her throat and slid into her seat. He moved, just slightly, to make room for her bag. His arm brushed against hers, the briefest contact, and it startled her more than the turbulence she knew was coming later. "Thanks," she murmured. He gave a tiny nod, nothing more. The lack of effort should have irritated her, but instead, it intrigued her. He wasn't trying to charm her. He wasn't posturing or flexing or filling the silence with needless chatter. He was simply there, present, grounded in a way that felt almost foreign to Dion. As the cabin filled with the noise of passengers settling in, she sat rigid in her seat, pretending to scroll through her phone while sneaking glances at him. The closer she looked, the more details she noticed. The faint scar above his right eyebrow, the small crease at the corner of his mouth, the way his lashes lowered slightly when he turned a page. He was quiet, but his presence spoke louder than anyone else on the plane. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Dion already knew this flight wasn't going to be like any other. Dion adjusted in her seat, pulling the airline blanket over her knees even though the cabin wasn't cold. It was an excuse, something to do with her hands, while her mind raced. She wasn't usually this distracted by men. She dated enough to know the type, loud, boastful, eager to impress. She could sniff out arrogance before a guy even opened his mouth. But this man, Dallas, though she didn't know his name yet, was a different category entirely. He hadn't said a single word since she sat down, and yet he was the only thing her body noticed. He exuded control without trying. His frame didn't just fill the seat, it owned it. But there was no fidgeting, no adjusting his sleeves to show off his arms, no overcompensating movements. Everything about him was tight, contained, and grounded. His quiet made her restless. She tried to focus on the in-flight magazine, but her eyes kept drifting sideways. The way his shirt stretched over his chest every time he took a slow breath. The curve of his neck leading to that sharp jawline. The way he tapped the edge of his book once before flipping a page like a tiny ritual. He looked expensive, but not flashy. No designer logos, no loud accessories. Just a black wristwatch, sleek, classic, no diamonds, and a calm that suggested the kind of wealth that didn't need announcing. That watch alone told Dion more than words ever could. She could tell he was used to silence. The kind of man who didn't fill the room with his presence, but never let it ignore him either. Even his posture said something, leaned slightly away from her, giving her space not in fear or disinterest, but out of some internal rulebook he didn't need to explain. Unbothered, unreadable. She couldn't tell if he was the kind of man who avoided small talk because he hated it, or because he just hadn't found anyone worth starting a real conversation with. Either way, Dion found herself wanting to say something, anything, to crack that shell. But what? Hey, nice muscles? Do you always look like you bench press people for fun? Nothing came out. Instead, she shifted slightly, pretending to stretch. Her arm brushed his again. This time he looked at her. Not a stare, a glance. Brief but direct, like he was reading something behind her face she hadn't said out loud. Then he turned back to his book. She swallowed. The tension that pooled in her stomach had nothing to do with fear. This wasn't lust, not entirely. It was curiosity, the way you feel when something about a person dares you to find out more. She'd sat beside many strangers on many flights, but none of them ever made her wonder what silence could mean. Until now. 20 minutes into the flight, the air settled. The hum of the engines blended with the occasional cough, the soft clink of drink carts, and the whisper of pages turning. Dion had given up trying to pretend she was reading. Her magazine sat open on her lap, unread. She shifted her gaze toward the man beside her again, carefully, slowly, as if being too direct would make him vanish. He hadn't said another word since thanks, but his presence lingered like an unfinished sentence. Every now and then, he would shift his weight, lean back, or turn a page, and Dion's eyes followed without meaning to. Her attention kept floating back to him like her body was reacting before her brain could step in. He exhaled slowly once, the kind of breath that wasn't meant to be noticed. But she noticed. She looked at his hands. Strong, veined, large, not soft hands. Hands that worked, or had worked, and still carried memory in their grip. He wore no ring, no sign of a relationship. Still, she told herself not to read too much into that. But the tension between them was real, not heavy or awkward, just there, unnamed but undeniable. She reached for her bag on the floor, her arm brushing his again. The contact was brief, but her skin prickled. This time, he didn't pretend not to notice. He looked at her. It wasn't a stare. It wasn't invasive. It was the kind of look that asked no questions, made no assumptions, but held her there all the same. Gray eyes, calm and calculating. He studied her without blinking, as if her movements puzzled him. For a second, neither of them looked away. Dion felt her breath catch. Not from nerves, but from the weight of being seen. She held his gaze longer than she meant to. Then she blinked and looked down, tucking a curl behind her ear. Her heart picked up speed. There was nothing flirtatious in his expression. Nothing teasing, no smile. But it stirred something in her. She didn't know what he did, where he was going, who waited for him at the other end of this flight. But in that quiet exchange, eye contact and silence, something passed between them. Something that didn't need language. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it was loaded with awareness, with stillness, with that subtle charge that only exists when two people are trying not to lean in, even though every part of them wants to. She crossed her legs, tried to focus on anything else, but she could still feel his presence beside her, like warmth from the sun. Quiet, steady, unshakable. Whatever this was, it wasn't loud, but it was growing. The seatbelt sign chimed again, and the captain's voice filled the cabin, calm but cautioning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting light turbulence for the next 30 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Dion stiffened. She hated turbulence, hated not being in control. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her legs and exhaled slowly, trying to focus on her breathing. She glanced at the man beside her, still reading, still unreadable, still completely unbothered. His page didn't even pause. Another jolt shook the plane. Dion's fingers clenched the edge of her seat. He glanced at her again. Quiet, but attentive. "You okay?" he asked, voice even. She nodded quickly, then gave a small nervous laugh. "I hate flying," she admitted. "Then sleep through it," he said, tone calm, like it was a simple solution. His voice was low, not deep enough to command a room, but strong enough to steady her nerves. She smirked, trying to come up with a response. But the plane dipped again, and her body reacted before her brain could. Her head tipped sideways and landed squarely on his shoulder. She jolted, immediately realizing what she'd done. "Oh God, sorry." But before she could sit up, he stilled. No flinch, no sharp reaction, no pulling away. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, quiet, solid, like it was okay, like she belonged there. His shoulder was broad, warm, more comfortable than any travel pillow money could buy. For a few seconds, Dion remained frozen, unsure what the rules were in this kind of situation. But his stillness gave her permission. He wasn't tense. He wasn't cold. He was just still. She exhaled slowly. Her cheek rested more fully against him. Her body sank into the seat, surrendering to the one thing she never allowed herself to feel on planes, safe. She closed her eyes. His chest rose and fell in rhythm, steady and sure. She felt it beneath her, and for the first time on a flight, she wasn't counting seconds or scanning the aisle for flight attendants. She slept. It wasn't long, maybe 30 minutes, but when she woke up, her head was still there, on his shoulder, resting like it was hers to claim. She blinked. Sat up slowly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He turned his head toward her. Those eyes again, gray, calm, unreadable. "It's all right." 2 words, but they landed with weight. She wanted to say something else, anything, but her mouth didn't cooperate. Her heart was pounding, her skin hot, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. But him? Still unreadable, still silent, still holding space like it was the easiest thing in the world. The wheels touched down with a thud. The cabin rattled, then smoothed out as the plane slowed along the runway. Seatbelt signs still on, passengers around them began the usual rustling. Stretching, waking, checking phones, reaching for bags overhead. Dion sat still. Awake now, alert, but not ready to move. Her shoulder still remembered the way he'd held it, without effort, without question. There had been no arm wrapped around her, no shift to accommodate her weight. He had just been there. It was disorienting, not because it was inappropriate, but because it felt familiar. She glanced at him again. His book was closed now. His hands rested on top of it, thumbs lightly tapping. He wasn't looking at her, but something about his stillness said he knew she was watching. The engine roared again as the plane taxied toward the gate. She swallowed and cleared her throat. I'm Dion, she said softly, not knowing why. His eyes turned toward her. Slow, direct. He didn't look surprised. He studied her face a moment, then gave a small nod. Dallas. She didn't expect him to offer a last name. She didn't offer hers. It didn't feel like that kind of moment. It wasn't casual. It wasn't romantic. It was something between. Something weighty in its silence. Passengers stood around them, unbuckling, pulling bags from overhead bins. Dion didn't move. Dallas stood first. He reached for the small leather duffel he'd stored below the seat in front of him. Smooth movements. Nothing rushed. She stood next. There was a small, strange ache in her chest, like she'd just walked through something real and didn't know how to keep it. The aisle cleared quickly. They stepped out together, the flow of the crowd forcing them forward. No words passed between them as they walked the narrow jet bridge. When they reached the gate, Dion paused. She turned slightly to say something, anything, but he had already begun to walk toward the terminal exit. Her lips parted. But she said nothing. What would she say? Wait. Give me your number? No. Too desperate. Too soon. She hesitated a moment longer, then turned toward baggage claim, feeling the air between them thicken with distance. But something made her glance back. Just once. He was still there. He hadn't left yet. He was watching her walk away, not smiling, not moving, just watching. Her heart gave a short, painful tug, and in that frozen second she knew. She wasn't done with him, not even close. It had been 3 weeks, 21 full days, and she still couldn't get him out of her head. Dion had replayed the flight more times than she cared to admit. The way his voice sounded when he asked, "You okay?" The quiet weight of his body beside hers, his shoulder beneath her cheek, his name, Dallas, echoing like a low hum in her chest. She had tried to reason it away. She didn't even know the man, not where he lived, not what he did. He hadn't flirted, hadn't asked for her number. He could have been married, or in a relationship, or maybe he just didn't care. But none of that changed what she felt when she closed her eyes and thought of him. It wasn't infatuation, not in the usual way. She'd met attractive men before. Charismatic men. Men who talked fast and looked good, and made promises they had no intention of keeping. Dallas was none of that. He was quiet. Still, like a safe place in a loud world. He had barely spoken to her, and yet somehow, her body had trusted him enough to sleep on his arm like it had known him forever. That's what kept her up at night. Not the kiss they didn't share, not the moment that never happened, but the peace she felt next to him. She'd told her best friend about him once, just casually over drinks. Mentioned the flight, the silence, the look in his eyes. Her friend had laughed, said she was being dramatic. Girl, it was a flight. He probably doesn't even remember your name. Dion had laughed too, pretended to agree, but inside, it stayed with her. The knowing, the unfinishedness of it all. And then there was the dream. It started showing up around week 2, her standing in an airport terminal, turning slowly in circles, searching. No loudspeakers, no crowd, just empty space, and him, always out of reach. Sometimes she'd wake up breathless. Other times she'd just stare at the ceiling and wonder what it meant to long for someone she barely knew. But it wasn't obsession. She didn't rearrange her schedule for the fantasy. She didn't try to stalk him online. She simply remembered. Remembered the way he made her feel, seen without question, held without effort. She went back to her routines. Work, calls, grocery runs. But the smallest things pulled him back into focus. A book like the one he was reading. The sound of low, deep male laughter. The color gray. He was everywhere and nowhere. And every time she thought the memory would fade, it returned sharper. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't finished. Dion stood in front of her bathroom mirror with a towel wrapped around. Her head, toothbrush in one hand, and her phone in the other. The headline on her screen read, "7 signs you're romanticizing a stranger." She rolled her eyes and clicked it anyway. Each bullet point made her sigh. Do you remember the way they looked more than what they said? Do you find yourself making up scenarios in your head? Do they feel more like a feeling than a person? Check. 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 She clicked her phone off and tossed it onto the counter. 3 weeks. It had been 3 whole weeks since that flight. Since her head found his shoulder. Since he said her name like he was sure of it. Dallas. She hadn't asked for more. No number, no last name. No look me up if you're ever in the city. But still, she thought about him. Every single day. She told herself it was the weirdness of it all. That it wasn't about him exactly. It was the feeling, the calm, the warmth, the safety that wrapped around her like a second skin for just 30 quiet minutes on a plane. But she knew better. It wasn't the idea of him. It was him. That jawline, those still gray eyes, the way he barely spoke and yet somehow communicated more than anyone else had in years. She tried to forget. Really, she did. She dove into work, picked up extra shifts, took long walks, avoided flights, and even skipped brunch with friends just so she wouldn't have to talk about him. But there were reminders everywhere. The gym was full of men who flexed in mirrors and talked too loud. The coffee shop guy tried to flirt and called her pretty lady without ever learning her name. None of it touched her. None of them felt like Dallas. She started to wonder if she had imagined it all, if maybe the tension she felt wasn't shared. Maybe he had just been polite. Maybe he'd already forgotten her. That thought stung more than she expected. Still, at night, when she lay in bed, her hand sometimes rested on her own shoulder, the spot where her head had touched his chest. The curve of his body felt like a memory engraved in skin. It didn't fade. She didn't want it to. Something about that moment on the plane had split her open quietly. Not painfully, just wide enough to notice the loneliness she had been carrying and how quickly it had gone still in his presence. She didn't believe in love at first sight. Still didn't. But she believed in connection, in energy. And whatever that was on seat 14A, it wasn't nothing. The bakery had become a habit before she realized it. It started with one visit the day after the flight. Dion had touched down, exited the terminal, and wandered into the nearest local spot that didn't feel like a chain. The little storefront sat 2 blocks from the airport. Unassuming. Brick walls. Chalkboard menu. A warm smell of yeast and vanilla drifted from the door. She walked in, ordered a croissant and a black coffee, sat by the window and stared at the sidewalk. That was it. That was the whole moment. She hadn't known she'd come back the next day, or the next. Now it was 3 weeks later, and she knew the cashier's name, Ella, the owner's favorite playlist, early 2000 seconds, R&B, and the exact table she liked to sit at, farthest from the door, next to the wide glass that faced the crosswalk. What she didn't tell anyone, not even herself fully, was why she kept coming. It wasn't the coffee. It wasn't the peaceful vibe. It was the hope. The barely logical, completely unreasonable hope that she might see him again. Dallas. He hadn't said where he lived. She didn't know if he was just passing through, but something about him had felt local. The way he dressed, the fact that he read a paperback instead of scrolling a phone, the way he hadn't rushed off the plane like he had anywhere urgent to be. She convinced herself he could be nearby. Maybe he worked around here. Maybe he flew often. Maybe he stopped at this exact bakery before business meetings, or after them. She never asked Ella if she'd seen him. She didn't want to seem crazy. But every day she sat there, in her beige trench coat or soft sweaters, sipping, from the same mug, watching the entrance in her peripheral vision, waiting. She told herself it wasn't desperation. She didn't stare. She didn't loiter. She always bought something. Always tipped. But the truth was, she'd started dressing a little nicer before coming. Not overly done, just intentional. A touch of gloss, a swipe of mascara, curling her hair instead of pulling it into a bun. Just in case. One time, a tall man walked in wearing gray, and she almost choked on her latte. It wasn't him. Another day, someone ordered a pastry and said his name, Dallas, but it was for a different man entirely. Still, she came back. Because when the world gave you 30 minutes that felt like peace, you didn't just forget it. You held on. Even if it made you look a little foolish. Even if it meant spending weeks in the corner of a bakery, pretending you liked croissants more than you did. Because some things were worth waiting for, even if they never walked through the door. The sky had been gray all morning. Not the dramatic kind. Just dull and flat. Like someone had dimmed the world and forgot to turn it back up. Dion sat in her usual spot by the window, hands wrapped around a warm mug. Vanilla latte, no foam. The scent drifted upward, soothing but unremarkable now. Rain tapped steadily against the glass. Not heavy, not light. just steady enough to feel like something was being washed away. She wore a beige wrap dress that clung softly to her waist, curls pinned loosely. No makeup, just lip balm and moisturizer. She hadn't planned to stay long. She just needed a moment before heading home. Ella, the cashier, had smiled when she walked in. "You're back again?" Dion had smiled back. "You say that like I ever left." Now she sat alone, stirring her drink, eyes tracing the raindrops racing each other down the pane. She had just taken her first sip when the door chimed. She didn't look up at first. People walked in all the time. Delivery drivers, office workers grabbing lunch, parents with strollers. But the air shifted. Not dramatically, just enough for her to notice. She glanced up and froze. He was standing just inside the doorway, hood pushed back, rain dripping from the sleeves of his gray hoodie. Underneath, a white t-shirt clung to his chest, damp and unbothered. His hair was slightly tousled, darker from the rain. His eyes scanned the room once, quick, efficient. Dallas. Her hand trembled slightly around the mug. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining him. Maybe her brain had finally conjured him up out of sheer longing. But then he moved, stepped forward, calm, quiet, no rush. He walked up to the counter and exchanged a few words with Ella. Clearly irregular, Dion didn't hear what he ordered. Couldn't hear anything past the pounding in her chest. She wiped her palms against her thighs and stared down at her drink, pretending to focus. Don't overreact. Don't stare. Don't look desperate. But every part of her was alert now. Eyes, ears, breath. He hadn't seen her yet. Or maybe he had and didn't recognize her. 3 weeks was a long time. She looked different, less tired, more awake. She turned slightly in her chair, stole another glance. He was still at the counter, standing tall, calm as ever. The barista handed him a small paper bag and a drink. He nodded, then turned, headed straight toward the door. No glance, no pause. Panic sparked in her chest. This was her chance. She couldn't let him walk out again. She stood, slowly, purposely, and stepped into his path. He stopped walking, right in front of her. His eyes landed on her face, and they didn't move. He didn't smile, didn't blink in surprise, didn't hesitate, just looked. For a beat, neither of them said anything. Rain still tapped the windows. The door eased shut behind him, and Dion could feel the entire room fading around her. She swallowed. Her voice didn't want to cooperate, but she pushed through it. "Dallas, right?" His expression shifted, barely. The smallest lift in his brow, a flicker of something behind his eyes. Silence stretched between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Then he said it. "Dion." Her stomach flipped. She blinked. "You remember?" "I do now." His voice was a little rougher than she remembered. Not tired, just lived in. A quiet rasp that curled low in her stomach. He didn't look away this time. Didn't go back to his drink. Didn't inch past her like she was just some face from a travel memory. He just stood there, that stillness again, like he wasn't trying to figure out what to say next. He was waiting to see if she would. She could have played it cool, could have made a joke, could have pretended this was all coincidence. But she was too relieved to pretend. "I've been looking for you," she said. Honest, soft, unapologetic. His brow lifted slightly again, not mocking, just listening. "Yeah?" He said. "Yeah." There it was again, that pause. That energy between them that wasn't loud, wasn't pressing, but made everything else around them go still. He looked at the pastry bag in his hand. Then, at the small corner table by the window. "Sit with me." Not a question, not a command, just a quiet invitation that didn't need frills. She nodded, heart racing. They walked to the table together. She placed her purse down carefully, trying to slow her breathing. He pulled out a chair for her, then slid into the seat across from her. Up close again, he looked the same but sharper. Like her memory hadn't done him full justice. Same gray eyes, same quiet calm. But now, without the hum of an airplane between them, she could see the detail. Tiny. Scar near his chin, faint shadows under his eyes, strong hands that hadn't changed. "I thought I might have made you up," she said, voice light but real. Dallas didn't laugh. He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't." No one brought over napkins. No one asked what they needed, and neither of them reached for their phones. The world didn't feel like it needed to move. It had paused for them. Again, the rain didn't let up. It pattered gently on the windows, a constant backdrop to everything unspoken. Dion sat across from him, her fingers curled lightly around her mug. The steam had long faded, but she hadn't taken another sip since he sat down. Her focus was elsewhere. Dallas leaned back slightly in his chair, one hand resting on the table, the other still holding the paper bag he hadn't opened. He didn't rush the moment, didn't ask for her number, didn't comment on how crazy it was to run into each other again. Instead, he asked, "What's your order here?" She blinked at the simplicity of it. Vanilla latte, no foam. Croissant if I'm pretending I'm not late for something. He gave a short nod. Figures. She raised an eyebrow. Figures? You look like someone who likes calm, even if you don't always live in it. The way he said it made her pause. It wasn't flirtation, it was observation. She studied him in return. "And what about you?" "Hot chocolate," he said. Every time, she tilted her head, surprised. "Seriously?" He nodded once. "Big guy like you, and you're ordering hot chocolate?" "Big guys get cold too," he replied, eyes holding hers. She laughed softly. It wasn't the kind of laugh that filled a room, just enough to ease her shoulders. From there, the conversation unraveled slowly, like a coat coming off one button at a time. They talked about food first, what they liked, what they didn't. He hated olives. She couldn't stand bananas. He loved lemon pastries. She told him he was a psychopath. Then came stories from childhood. She'd grown up in a small town in Georgia. He was raised outside of Denver. She talked about playing with cousins in wide-open fields. He told her about camping trips with his uncle and getting stuck in the mountains during a thunderstorm. Their words didn't run fast, but they didn't stall either. It was the kind of flow that built its own rhythm. Dion asked about his book, the one he'd been reading on the flight. He held her gaze, didn't read a word of it. She blinked. "But you look so focused." "I was trying not to look at you." Her breath caught. She didn't respond right away. That was the difference. He didn't say things for effect. He said them because they were true. For 2 hours they didn't look at the clock. They didn't notice the people around them or how the room changed. The rain outside blurred the world into softness, and inside, two strangers sat holding something that felt like the start of something real. No games, no pickup lines, just two people who felt oddly like they already knew each other, and neither of them wanted to leave. Dion never thought small talk could feel like something sacred. But this wasn't small. They weren't rushing through topics or filling silence with filler. Every question Dallas asked carried weight, not pressure, just care. "What do you wish people noticed about you first?" he asked. She blinked. No one had ever asked her that. She stalled, playing with the edge of her napkin. "That I'm soft, even if I pretend I'm not." He nodded like he understood that all too well. "What about you?" she asked. He looked out the window for a moment before answering. "That I'm paying attention. Even when I don't say much." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. There was no bragging in his voice, no edge. He didn't speak to impress, he spoke to connect. The rain outside began to slow, but neither of them made a move to check the time or stand. Dion rested her chin lightly on her knuckles, her curls falling forward. "Are you always this quiet?" He smirked, just barely. "Only when I'm not bored." She smiled, a little wider now. "So, I'm not boring?" "Not even close." Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. It was the most natural thing, sitting across from him. She didn't feel like she had to perform. Didn't feel the urge to prove she was interesting, funny, smart. He gave space for her to just be. She told him about how she used to be afraid of thunderstorms as a kid, how she would crawl under the kitchen table with a flashlight and pretend she was camping in the dark, just to calm herself. He shared that he once ran away from home at age 9, only made it 2 blocks before realizing he forgot snacks. She laughed so hard her stomach hurt. There were no heavy confessions yet, no life-shattering stories, but every word exchanged wove something between them. Trust, curiosity, ease. She noticed the way his eyes didn't wander. He didn't check his phone once. When she spoke, he listened, really listened, like her words were worth holding on to. When their conversation drifted into silence, it didn't feel like a stop. It felt like a rest, a breath, the kind of pause that said, "We're still here." She studied his features in the quiet, the small crease between his brows, the way he tapped his thumb against the paper coffee sleeve, the clean cut of his jaw. And she felt it again, that calm she had felt on the plane, that sense that she didn't have to guard her emotions here, not with him. Time had slipped through the cracks without warning. It had only been 2 hours, but it felt like they'd known each other longer than that, like maybe the world had been circling them both, waiting for this exact collision. The clouds outside had shifted. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The soft glow of late afternoon peeked through the bakery windows, casting a muted warmth over the table. Dion blinked and glanced at the time on her phone for the first time in hours. "Wow, I didn't realize how long we've been sitting here." Dallas nodded. "Neither did I." There was no awkward scramble to end the conversation, no quick stand-up or fake yawn. Instead, they sat in that same stillness they had started with, both reluctant to be the one to break it. Finally, Dion stood. "I should head out. Beat traffic." He rose, fluid and unhurried. "Where's your car?" She motioned toward the side street. "Just around the corner." "I'll walk you," he said. Not a question, not a suggestion, just a quiet promise like every other word he spoke. Outside, the sidewalk glistened. Puddles gathered near the curb, reflecting the soft gray of the sky above. Dion clutched her coat tighter as a breeze moved past them. Dallas fell into step beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze forward. They didn't talk at first, but it didn't feel empty. It felt right, the kind of silence that needed no apology. Her heels tapped softly against the wet pavement. His footsteps were slower, heavier, but perfectly matched to hers. They reached her car, parked beneath a tree still dripping from the rain. She clicked the key fob, the headlights flashing once. She turned toward him. "So..." She started. He looked at her. Direct. Still. "I want to see you again." No hesitation. She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity. Her chest lifted with something like relief. "So do I." His expression didn't shift much, but his eyes softened, just a bit, like she'd said something that mattered. She opened the car door, one hand gripping the handle. He stepped forward, not close, but close enough for her to hear him clearly. "Same place tomorrow?" Dion paused, then smiled. "Yeah, same place." He nodded once. No drawn-out goodbyes, no promises of forever, just that. She slipped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and adjusted her mirror. When she glanced out the window, he was still there, watching, calm, still, that quiet presence that had somehow wrapped itself around her in ways she couldn't explain. She drove off, heart thudding gently, not with nerves, but something steadier. Expectation, peace, the feeling of something real beginning. Without needing to rush, Dion sat in her car for a full minute before pulling off. Not because she was stalling, but because she wanted to feel it. All of it. The air still smelled faintly of rain. Her coat clung damp against her sleeves. Her hair had frizzed a little from the humidity, and yet none of it mattered. Her pulse had slowed, not sped up. Her thoughts weren't racing. She wasn't questioning what he meant when he said, "I want to see you again." Because for the first time in a long time, something felt simple, easy. Not because it lacked depth, but because it didn't demand confusion. Dallas hadn't tried to charm her, hadn't promised anything wild. He had just been present. Again. That same steadiness from the plane, the one she thought she'd never feel again, was now walking beside her into something new. She didn't know where it was going, didn't know what he did for a living, didn't know what this was yet, but she knew it wasn't nothing. And sometimes when the world gave you that, you didn't ask for more. You leaned in. She pulled away from the curb slowly, the bakery disappearing in the rear view. But this time, she wasn't looking back in search of what-ifs. She was looking ahead, toward tomorrow, toward that same corner seat by the window, toward the man who, somehow, had already managed to shift something inside her. And for once, she wasn't scared. She was ready. Have you ever met someone who didn't have to say much, yet still managed to stay on your mind for days? Someone whose silence meant more than someone else's loudest declarations? Some connections don't need perfect timing, just two people brave enough to try. If you've ever held on to a what-if, drop an emoji in the comments. Tap like if you believe real love doesn't have to be complicated. Share this video with someone who believes timing isn't everything. Connection is. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a powerful story from Mr. Peterson Long Stories. The next morning, Dion arrived at the bakery early. She wore soft denim and a cream sweater, her curls pulled into a low, lazy bun. She hadn't dressed up, but she hadn't thrown anything on either. There was intention in every thread. She ordered her usual and took her seat by the window. For the first time since she began frequenting this place, the ritual didn't feel lonely. She didn't have to wait long. At 9:47 a.m., the bell above the door gave its familiar chime. Dallas walked in. No hoodie this time, just a fitted gray long-sleeve black jeans and the same calm in his step. He greeted the barista with a quiet nod, received his order in under a minute, then turned toward her without scanning the room. He had seen her already. They didn't wave. They didn't greet each other like strangers pretending not to be strangers. He walked directly to her table and sat across from her like he belonged there. "Good morning," he said. Her smile grew before she answered. "You're late." "I'm exactly on time," he replied, sliding his pastry bag aside. She raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "Because you're smiling." She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from doing it wider. That morning became a second morning, then a third, then 4 more after that. Each time, they met without needing to confirm. No texts, no formal plan. Just two people who kept showing up. Sometimes they talked for an hour. Other times they barely said anything at all. Dion found that refreshing. Dallas wasn't trying to fill space. If she came in quiet, he didn't ask why. He just poured sugar into his drink and waited until she was ready to speak. Once, she asked him about his job. "I build systems," he said simply. "What kind?" "Technology infrastructure, data, security." She tilted her head. "So, like firewalls?" He smirked slightly. "Among other things." That was as much detail as he gave, not because he was hiding, but because he wasn't interested in selling himself. After that, she didn't ask again. He started picking up on her habits quickly, noted the way she always looked out the window during pauses, how she tapped her fingers when thinking, how she never added sugar to her drink, but always stole a piece of the pastry he ordered. By the second week, he began ordering 2 lemon pastries automatically. One for him, one for her. "No more stealing," he said, sliding the second one across the table. She smiled without a word. No titles, no expectations, no pressure, just 2 people, slowly folding into each other's days like it had been this way all along. Dallas Kane didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always the right thing. He never interrupted, never filled silence with noise, never changed the subject to make himself more interesting. Dion noticed it early, how present he was, even when he said nothing. He sat in that same chair across from her each morning. No need for texting, no need for planning. He simply showed up, on time, every time, and not once did he walk in distracted. He didn't scroll his phone. He didn't glance around the bakery. His focus was her. Even in the moments when she wasn't talking, he watched her with a softness that didn't demand explanation. He noticed things. He noticed when her laugh was lighter than usual and when it wasn't. He caught the way she rubbed her wrist when she was tired, or how she always stirred her drink counterclockwise without thinking. He never pointed these things out for attention. He just acted on them. One morning, she came in wearing flats instead of heels. He didn't ask why, but when they walked out, he matched her slower pace without a word. Another day, she forgot to eat. He slid half his croissant toward her without blinking. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. It just happened, like it was already a rule between them. And when she showed up once with damp eyes, clearly holding something heavy, he didn't ask questions. He just sat with her, not speaking, not shifting in discomfort, just there. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was consistent. And for Dion, consistency was rare. She had known men who promised big gestures, then disappeared after 2 weeks. She had known men who told her she was too much when she opened up, and too cold when she didn't. But Dallas didn't label her moods. He didn't demand her joy to feel validated. If she was quiet, he let her be. If she laughed, he joined her. If she teased, he leaned in, but never too far. He didn't just listen to respond. He listened to understand. He watched for details not to control, but to care. Even the way he looked at her felt intentional, like he was storing pieces of her, tiny fragments, in the back of his mind for reasons he didn't need to explain. Dion once said, half joking, "You're hard to read." He looked up, expression steady. Only because people don't take time. That stuck with her. Because Dallas was readable, if you slowed down enough, if you paid attention like he did. If you understood that gentleness wasn't weakness, it was patience. And in every moment with him, Dion felt more seen than she had in years. It started with a sigh, not a dramatic one, not the kind that begs for attention, just a quiet release, tired, deep, real. Dallas noticed it. He looked up from his drink, met her eyes, and waited. He didn't push, didn't tilt his head in that talk to me way most people did. He just waited. Dion stared at her cup. Her hands wrapped tight around the ceramic, like she needed something solid to anchor her. "You ever carry things," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "for so long that you forget how heavy they are?" Dallas didn't blink. Yes, that was all it took. She started talking. Not everything at once, not in a flood, but in layers, carefully placed, deliberately spaced. She told him about her hometown, how she grew up in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but still pretended they didn't. How she was always the girl people assumed would leave, and when she finally did, they said she'd be back within a year. She never went back. She talked about her last relationship, how it started off warm, hopeful, full of promise, how it turned cold, quietly. He never yelled, never hit her. He just started making her feel small, like her dreams were hobbies, like her ambition was a flaw. She shrunk herself to keep peace. "And the more I shrunk," she said, eyes lowered, "the more he pulled away." She told Dallas how she once thought she was pregnant. She was terrified, she told the man, and he disappeared within days. No calls, no messages, nothing. She wasn't pregnant. It turned out to be a false alarm, but by then, the damage had already been done. Dallas didn't interrupt, not once. He didn't say that guy was trash. He didn't offer cliches. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, eyes steady, his hand still around his cup. She paused, looked up at him. "I don't usually talk about this." "I know," he said. His tone didn't shift. He didn't look at her like she was broken or fragile. He looked at her like she was a whole person who had survived things that could have undone her, but didn't. Dion waited for him to speak again, to ask something, to lean in or change the subject. But he just held the space, let it be hers. That's when she realized what was happening. She wasn't oversharing. She wasn't bleeding out emotionally to someone who couldn't hold it. She was opening, and he was holding it all with quiet, unwavering care. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel heavy when she left the table. She felt lighter. The next morning, Dion wondered if she had said too much. She stared at herself in the mirror before leaving the house. Her reflection looked calm, but her mind wasn't. What if she'd unloaded too much on him? What if he didn't come back? What if the weight of her truth was more than he signed up for? But she still went to the bakery, still ordered her usual, still took her seat by the window and waited. At 9:47, the bell chimed. He walked in, on time, like always. Same calm steps, same steady gaze. And when their eyes met, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the table and sat down. No awkwardness, no small talk to cover tension. He simply pulled the extra lemon pastry from his bag and set it in front of her, like he always did. Dion exhaled slowly. She didn't bring up yesterday's conversation. She wasn't sure if he would. But 15 minutes in, as she took a sip of her drink, he spoke. "My sister got pregnant at 19, he said, eyes focused on the cup in his hands. Dion looked up. She was scared to tell anyone, especially my mom. I found out by accident, saw the test in the trash. He paused. I sat with her all night before she said a single word. She cried for 3 hours, not because she didn't want the baby, because she already knew the father was gone. Dion didn't breathe. She raised that boy by herself, he continued. Worked 2 jobs, got her degree online, never once asked for help she didn't earn. He glanced at her then. Not dramatic, not overly emotional, just honest. Strong women deserve peace, he said. Not men who make them feel like burdens. The air between them held still for a beat. Dion's fingers curled tighter around her cup. She didn't need him to say that. But the fact that he did, that he chose that moment to let her see behind his quiet, it meant something. Dallas didn't share often, but when he did, it was never surface level. He didn't tell stories to make himself look good. He told them to build bridges. And right now, he wasn't just listening. He was standing beside her in the memory she thought would push him away. "You didn't run," she said softly. His gaze held hers. "That's not something you run from." And in that moment she knew he wasn't being kind out of pity. He wasn't treating her gently because he saw her as wounded. He was showing up, fully, because he understood what it meant to carry pain and still want to be held like a whole person. And somehow, without even touching her hand, Dallas made her feel safe again. The rain hadn't been in the forecast. It came out of nowhere, light at first, then steady, soaking the sidewalks and tapping rhythmically on the bakery's windows. Dion looked outside, then glanced down at her phone. She'd left her umbrella in the car, and her trench coat was nowhere near waterproof. Dallas noticed. "I'll walk you." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. She didn't want to say no. She didn't want to part ways with a wave from the door. They stepped out together, under a wide black umbrella Dallas pulled from his bag, like it was part of his daily routine. She wondered if it was. He held it low over them, and they walked shoulder to shoulder down the narrow sidewalk. The rain didn't slow. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, wrapping the city in a quiet that muted everything but their steps. They didn't speak much. Dion glanced sideways once. His jaw was tight, focused. His free hand was in his pocket, but he moved in rhythm with her like they'd done it 1,000 times before. There was something about the silence with him that never felt empty. Even now, when they reached her car, she stopped at the curb. He stopped, too. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain dripped from the edge of the umbrella, pooling near their feet. She turned toward him. Their shoulders were already close, but now she could feel the warmth of his body in the small space between them. Her heart beat louder than the rain. Dallas didn't move. His eyes searched hers, not rushed, not pressing. And when he spoke, his voice was low, intentional. "I want to kiss you," he said, "but not if you're unsure." Her breath caught. The air around them felt sharper, closer. She didn't blink. "I'm not unsure," she whispered. He didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, the umbrella tipping slightly, rain landing on the back of his neck. One hand stayed holding it above them. The other, slow, careful, found her waist. Dion's eyes fluttered shut as his head lowered. When his lips touched hers, it wasn't abrupt. It was deliberate, anchored, real. No hunger, no rush, just warmth, pressure, a gentle pull forward. His lips moved with hers in quiet sync, not demanding more, but offering it. Her hands found the front of his shirt, clutching, not for balance, but for grounding. And when the kiss deepened slightly, it wasn't from need. It was from trust. He pulled away only slightly, his forehead resting against hers. She didn't speak, neither did he. The rain kept falling. Her skin prickled from the cool air, but her chest was warm, full. That kiss didn't ask a question. It answered one. The air between them stayed still after the kiss. Dion didn't move. Her fingers were still curled lightly in his shirt. His hand rested just above her hip, steady, unmoving. Neither of them looked away. Dallas's breath was warm against her cheek. He didn't try to pull her in again, didn't rush toward a second kiss. Instead, he waited. Even after that kiss, slow, grounded, perfect, he didn't assume. Dion's chest rose and fell with a slow rhythm. He finally spoke. His voice was low, not hesitant, just careful. "If I ever touch you again, it won't be halfway." She looked up at him. Her throat tightened. "I don't want halfway," she said. His jaw tensed slightly, but not with anger, with restraint. "I move slow," he said. "I don't mind slow," she replied. Silence. Then, "I'll never take more than you want to give." She swallowed. His words weren't romantic in the traditional sense, but they reached deeper than anything scripted ever could. They were clear, unshaken. They gave her space without pushing her out. She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest. His arm didn't tighten. He didn't use the moment to press his advantage. He simply stood there, like a man who understood that closeness wasn't permission, it was trust. She felt his heart beating through his shirt. Steady, firm. "I don't let people close," she said quietly. His hand brushed lightly down her back. "You don't have to explain." But I want to. He waited. She tilted her head up to look at him again. This scares me. But not because of you. I know. He ran a thumb gently along her jaw. Slow, careful. I'll never touch you without asking, he said. She nodded. Dallas. Yeah? I want you to touch me. That pause, just a second, held more gravity than anything else between them so far. She didn't mean it in a rushed, chaotic way. Not in the way she had with men who tried to get something from her and disappear. She meant it as a statement of trust, and he knew that. Not tonight, he said gently. But soon. She nodded again. He leaned down, placed a soft kiss on her temple, then stepped back. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll answer. He smiled. A small one. Real. Private. She got into her car with a sense of calm that surprised her. He hadn't taken a thing from her, but somehow he had given her something she didn't even know she needed. The right to decide. The comfort to be wanted without pressure. The assurance that when things did move forward, it would be mutual. It would be slow. And it would be hers too. They didn't kiss again for 5 days. Not because the spark dimmed. Not because anything had changed. But because they both respected the space between desire and readiness. Dion liked that about Dallas. He didn't chase affection like it owed him something. He waited for the right moment, and when it came, he moved with certainty. It was a Thursday evening when it happened again. The city was unusually quiet. A light breeze carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby flower shop. They had left the bakery an hour earlier, but didn't want to say goodbye yet. They walked. No destination. Just steps and silence and glances that lingered longer than they had last week. He walked close enough for their arms to brush. She didn't move away. At one point he stopped beneath a street lamp where the light fell soft and warm. Dion turned toward him. His eyes held hers. Calm. Still. I've wanted to do this, he said, every day since the plane. Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught in her throat. He stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Still okay? He asked, barely above a whisper. She didn't speak. She just reached up, fingers brushing the back of his neck, pulling him gently forward. That was her answer. He kissed her again. But this time, it wasn't tentative. It was sure. Grounded. Unrushed. His hands settled at her waist, thumbs tracing small circles through the fabric of her dress. Her body leaned into his. She pressed a hand to his chest, not to push away, but to feel the rhythm of his heart against her palm. His lips moved with intention. No teasing, no performance, just presence. She tilted her head slightly, deepening the kiss, feeling the weight of his focus in every movement. He wasn't trying to devour her. He was trying to memorize her. The pace never quickened beyond what felt natural. He kissed her like a man who understood that slowness could be more intimate than urgency. Her fingers curled into his shirt. She exhaled through her nose, soft and shaky. When he finally pulled back, his eyes didn't drop to her lips. They stayed on hers. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds. Dion smiled first. You kiss like you mean it. Dallas shrugged gently. I do. She felt warm from the inside out. Not flushed, not dizzy, just full. That kiss wasn't a question. It was a promise. And from the way his hand lingered at the small of her back, she knew he wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not unless she asked him to, and she had no plans to. Time didn't rush them. Neither did they. What started at a window table became a rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened, without declarations, without demands. Dion and Dallas didn't need constant communication to feel close. Their connection wasn't built on the number of calls or how many good morning texts were exchanged. It grew through presence. Consistency. Stillness. He showed up every time. And she did too. Sometimes they didn't meet at the bakery. Sometimes it was a quiet walk through her neighborhood or a drive through the city after dinner. Windows cracked, music playing low, conversation meandering from childhood memories to what they feared most. Dallas didn't force her to talk, but when she did, he listened in a way that made her feel heard in places she didn't know were still echoing. He never judged, never rushed her through a thought, never tried to fix anything. He just let her be, and that alone was its own kind of healing. One night, while parked outside her building, they sat in silence for a while. The radio hummed some forgotten jazz tune. Her head rested against the passenger window, eyes closed. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. No rhythm, just habit. She finally broke the quiet. "What are you most afraid of?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Letting someone in," he said after a beat, "and not knowing what to do when they stay." Her eyes opened. She looked at him. "You're doing fine so far." That was the thing about Dallas. He didn't talk about emotions easily, but when he did, he never missed. And Dion? She didn't need grand romantic speeches. She needed space to be vulnerable without paying a price for it. That's what Dallas gave her. She told him about the time her father forgot her 10th birthday, and how they'd pretended it didn't bother her, then cried herself to sleep for a week. He didn't say, "That's awful." He just said, "I'm sorry he missed it. You deserved better." That was enough. They began touching more, not in big ways, but in the ways that mattered. His hand resting on the back of her neck while she spoke, her fingertips tracing his wrist while he watched her talk. Subtle, but real. No rush, no pressure, just slow unfolding. Trust built through repetition, through shared meals, through him remembering how she took her tea and her asking if he was sleeping enough. Emotional intimacy wasn't something they named. It just grew, every day, and neither of them was afraid of it anymore. Some nights, they didn't need plans. Dallas would text a single word, "outside," and Dion would come down, cardigan. Over her shoulders, curls loose, smile already tugging at her lips. They never did anything flashy. No rooftop dinners, no champagne, no candlelit setups for Instagram. Most evenings looked like this. A drive with no music, or with a playlist he made just for her. A stop at a food truck with no sign, just smell. Parked somewhere quiet, eating tacos and wiping grease off their fingers with brown napkins. Then back to her apartment. The couch became familiar. They didn't always sit close at first. Sometimes they faced each other, knees touching. Other times she curled against him, her head on his shoulder, his arm tucked behind her like it belonged there. One night, she lit a candle. Not for effect, but because it smelled like vanilla and made her living room feel warm. He came in, took off his boots at the door without being asked, and dropped a small paper bag on her coffee table. "From that Lebanese bakery on 6th, he said. Dion opened it. Her favorite almond pastries. "You remembered," she murmured. His response was simple. "I pay attention." They ate with their fingers. No plates. She licked the sugar from her thumb, and when she looked up, he was already watching. Not hungrily. Not in a way that made her shrink. Just watching. Like he was memorizing the way she looked when she wasn't thinking about how she looked. Their conversations deepened. Not always dramatic, but honest. "What scares you most?" he asked one night. "Wasting time on someone who never wanted to stay," she said without thinking. He nodded slowly. "That's fair." He didn't promise he'd stay. Didn't try to reassure her with words he hadn't earned yet. Instead, he stayed there that night, on the couch beside her, fingers lightly tracing hers as she drifted off, breath slow, comforted by something she never thought she'd have again, stillness in another person's presence. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night, look over at him, head tilted back, lips parted in sleep, and wonder how she got here, not in a panicked way, in awe. He never tried to win her over with gifts or smooth lines. She just showed up and stayed. One night, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she whispered, "You're not what I expected." Dallas kissed the top of her head and said, "You either, thank God." She smiled and closed her eyes. Because with him, quiet didn't mean emptiness. It meant comfort. It meant trust. It meant something was growing beneath the surface. Dion had never invited a man to her space without hesitation. Not since her last relationship. Not since she'd stood by the door while someone she once loved walked out, slamming it behind him, leaving silence and the smell of his cologne behind. Since then, her apartment had been her boundary, her peace, her proof that she could build something on her own. But with Dallas, it was different. It wasn't a grand decision. It wasn't a calculated move. It happened naturally, like so much with him. They had just left the bakery. It was a quiet Friday evening. No rain, no wind, just soft air and the hum of streetlights. "I've got lemon tarts from that French place near my job," she said as they reached her car. His eyes flicked to hers. "Yeah?" She nodded. and a couch that's 10 times more comfortable than this parking lot. A beat passed. Then he smiled, small, sure, warm. Lead the way. She drove. He followed. Her apartment wasn't large. 1 bedroom, exposed brick, plants on the windowsill that she actually managed to keep alive. The kind of space that looked like it had been loved, not staged. She didn't rush to tidy anything before he came in, didn't scramble to hide parts of her life. She opened the door and let him see it all. Shoes kicked off near the rug, books stacked under the coffee table, a single framed photo of her mom and aunt by the kitchen sink. He looked around, calm as ever. Nice, he said. Smells like cinnamon and something warm. That's probably just me, she teased, setting her purse down. He chuckled. Then keep standing there. She rolled her eyes but didn't move. The tarts were still in their paper box, slightly crumbled from the drive. She grabbed 2 plates from the cupboard, handed him a fork, and sat cross-legged on the couch. He sat beside her, closer than before, their knees touching. Your place suits you, he said after a few bites. How? He didn't hesitate. It feels real. She glanced at him, surprised by the word. He added, some people decorate for show. Yours feels like it belongs to someone who actually lives here. She looked around, suddenly seeing her space through his eyes. And she liked the idea that he saw her comfort as strength, not clutter. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing needed explaining. And as the night went on, the space between them got smaller, not from proximity, but from trust. She hadn't meant for the evening to feel intimate, but it did. Not in the way that meant taking off clothes. In the way that meant letting someone fully into the space you built when you were healing, and realizing you weren't afraid of it anymore. The last tart was half eaten on Dion's plate, and the fork dangled lazily in her hand. The TV was on but muted, just colors and motion playing in the background. Dallas hadn't touched his food in 5 minutes. He was watching her, not in a way that begged for attention, not in a way that made her self-conscious, but it was direct, open, focused. She felt it first, his eyes, the slow rise of heat up her neck, the way her breath shifted, just slightly, when she leaned forward to grab a napkin, and his gaze didn't move. What? She asked, eyes narrowed in mock suspicion as she wiped powdered sugar from her fingers. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, arm draped along the back of the couch, eyes still on her. You look different when you're relaxed, he said. She tilted her head. Different how? Like you're not waiting for something to go wrong. His words hit soft, but true. She blinked. It wasn't the compliment she expected. It wasn't about her hair, her body, her outfit. It was about presence, stillness, trust. You always read people like this? She asked, tone playful to hide how deeply his words landed. Only when I want to. She smirked. And you want to read me? Already, Em. There was no flirt in his tone, just fact. She set her plate aside, turned slightly toward him. All right then, what else have you read? He watched her for a moment. Thoughtful, deliberate. You overthink compliments, he said. You deflect when someone sees something you're not sure you believe about yourself. And you clean when you're anxious. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Wow, she said finally. That's unsettlingly accurate. He lifted a shoulder. You asked. Fair. She studied him now. You know what I see when I look at you. Dallas raised an eyebrow. Do I want to know? You make stillness look easy. That made him pause. She continued. Most men like you, big, quiet, controlled, they wear it like a defense. But you, it feels honest, like you don't need to be loud to matter. His face didn't change much, but his eyes softened. Then slowly, he reached forward, just enough to brush a crumb from the corner of her mouth with his thumb. The touch was barely there, but her breath hitched. Her voice dropped. You're staring again. I know. And you're not going to stop? Not if I don't have to. The space between them charged without effort. It didn't feel like escalation. It felt like a current that had always been there, finally coming to the surface. She didn't move away, didn't crack a joke, didn't flinch. She just looked back at him, letting herself be seen. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't bracing for the moment to end. The silence between them didn't last long. It wasn't uncomfortable. It simmered. Dion shifted slightly, her legs now tucked underneath her as she faced Dallas fully. Her curls fell over one shoulder, catching the dim light of the lamp on the far end of the room. Dallas still hadn't moved, but the weight of his stare, that was loud. "You always this intense?" she asked, voice low, half teasing, half aware of what was building. He gave her a slow nod. "Only when something's worth my full attention." A beat passed. She looked down at her hands, her pulse louder than the muted television, then back up. "What are you trying to do, Dallas?" "Nothing," he said plainly. "You invited me here. You let me in. I'm just present." She swallowed. "But you're looking at me like that." He leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter. "Like what? Like you're 2 seconds away from kissing you?" She froze. The air between them snapped. He didn't lean closer yet. He stayed still, watching her carefully. "I don't do maybes," he said, tone firm but not forceful. "So if you want me to stop, say it now." Her heart beat hard against her chest. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. He continued, voice almost a whisper. "I don't move unless you want me to." She nodded. "Once. That was all." Dallas reached out, slowly. His hand brushed against her jaw. She tilted into it. "You're not a maybe to me," she said softly. His thumb grazed her cheek. "Say that again." "You're not a maybe," she repeated, voice firm now. And that was it. Their mouths met. Not rushed, not forced. It was slow, like a question asked and answered all at once. His hand stayed at her jaw. Hers found his shirt, fingers curling in the fabric. Their breaths synced, deep and quiet, like they'd both been holding them for too long. Every shift, every pull was measured, not because they were holding back, but because they were learning the shape of the moment. The kiss deepened. Her fingers moved up, grazing the back of his neck. He let out the softest exhale, almost a groan. And still, he didn't push, didn't rush. The way he kissed her said one thing clearly: "I'm here for more than your body." And Dion felt it in every heartbeat. By the time they pulled apart, the room felt warmer. Her skin was flushed. His hands were steady. She leaned her forehead against his and whispered, "You feel safe." He closed his eyes. "You don't know how much that means." And they sat there, breathing the same air, knowing something had shifted. Not into lust, into something slower, stronger, something neither of them would take lightly. Dallas didn't leave. Not right away. They sat on the floor, backs against the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them quiet. Every now and then his fingers brushed hers, soft, barely there. And yet, it said everything. When she turned her head to look at him, her curls brushed his cheek. He looked down at her, eyes unreadable but full. She lifted her hand, touched the curve of his jaw. He leaned into it slightly, as if that tiny gesture meant more than words. "You didn't kiss me just to see what it felt like, did you?" she asked, voice low. "No." "Then why?" Dallas tilted his head, brushing a thumb along her wrist. "Because I've wanted to since the plane," he said. "But I wanted to do it right." Dion's heart knocked hard. She sat up straighter. So did he. Their knees touched. The space between them vanished again, only this time she leaned in first. He met her halfway. And the kiss? It was different. Slower, yes, but deeper. Full of tension that had finally stopped asking for permission. His hand slid into her curls. Hers wrapped around his arm. She opened to him, mouth soft, breath fast, fingers slipping along his collarbone. He pulled her closer, pressing her against him as if afraid the moment might break. They kissed like they knew it wouldn't stop there. Like the air between them had decided it was tired of being empty. Dion shifted, one leg sliding over his, straddling him. He let out a low groan, not desperate, but raw. His hands gripped her waist, not to control her, to steady himself. Her mouth moved over his, deliberate, heated, hungry. She whispered his name against his lips. He responded with hers, spoken like a vow. Still, neither of them moved too fast. Everything was careful, consensual. Dallas pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. His voice came out ragged. "If we keep going." She nodded. "I know. You sure?" She kissed him again, softer this time, slower, I trust you, she said. He smiled, breath still unsteady. I don't want you to think this is a step, he said. This isn't just heat for me. Her fingers slid down to his chest. I know, she said again. And she did. Because no kiss had ever made her feel so chosen, so seen, so completely respected. They kissed again. And again, until her lips were swollen, his hands trembling, and the room had narrowed down to two people learning how desire and care could exist in the same breath. When she finally shifted off his lap, their eyes locked. No words, none needed, only the pulse of something inevitable, growing, but not rushing. The air felt heavier now, not uncomfortable, just charged, as if both their bodies were speaking louder than their mouths could. Dallas stood first, offering Dion his hand. She took it. Their fingers stayed laced as they moved toward the couch, neither of them saying what they both knew. They didn't need to. She sat. He joined her, close but not pressing. Her knee touched his thigh. His hand rested beside hers, not quite reaching, not quite pulling away. Silence stretched, not awkward, not tense, just full of want, full of restraint, full of a mutual understanding that they were towing the edge of something sacred. She looked at him. I haven't done this in a while, she said softly. He turned to face her. Me neither. Their eyes held. I don't want you to think I'm unsure, she added. I don't, he said. But I need to know what you want. Dion leaned her head back, thinking. Then she turned toward him again, her voice quieter. I want you to know me first, all of me. His eyes didn't blink. That's what I want too. She exhaled slowly, the tension easing from her shoulders. He leaned in again, pressed a slow kiss to her cheek, then another to her jaw. Gentle, careful. Her eyes closed. His mouth moved to her neck, soft and warm. Her fingers curled into his shirt. He stopped, pulled back. She opened her eyes. I want you, he said. But not until you're sure it's love, not comfort, not loneliness, not attraction. Her throat tightened. It's not any of those things, she whispered. Then when it's time, I'll know, he said, because you'll be the one to say it. She nodded. He pulled her gently against his chest, wrapped both arms around her like she was already his. She settled into him, her cheek against his shoulder, her heartbeat slowing. The warmth between them didn't fade, it settled. No urgency, no rushing, just skin, closeness, and understanding. They stayed like that for a while, until the moonlight shifted on the floor, until the hunger quieted into something deeper, something that asked to be nourished with time, not taken in a hurry. Eventually, he kissed the top of her head. I should go, he whispered. She didn't stop him, but when he stood and she walked him to the door, his hand lingered at her waist. He kissed her again, slow, long, a promise without a timeline, and when the door closed, Dion leaned against it, heart full, lips tingling, body aching, but not empty, because for the first time she hadn't been touched and left wanting. She had been seen and left waiting, by choice. The next morning, Dion didn't wake up feeling used or unsure. She felt grounded, wanted, but respected. She replayed every second from last night, his hands, his words, the way. He looked at her like she was something sacred, not a passing thrill. She smiled into her pillow. By noon, Dallas texted, I'm outside. Didn't want to assume. Should I stay or come back later? Dion peeked out her window. There he was, leaning against his black SUV, hoodie, sweatpants, head down, hands in his pockets, a man who looked like he could own the street, waiting like a boy unsure if he should knock. She texted back, stay. They walked around the block. Nothing planned, but every step felt like more than exercise. It felt like building something. You didn't have to come, she said, glancing at him. I know, he replied, but I couldn't stay away. She gave him a look, half warning, half curious. Dallas stopped walking. I want to make something clear, he said. About last night. She froze. Okay. He turned fully to her. That wasn't me testing the waters. That wasn't me checking how far I could go. She stayed quiet. He stepped closer, voice low. When we get to that place, and we will, it won't be because we're caught in a moment. It won't be after wine or late-night tension. Dion raised her chin. Then what? It'll be with full intention, he said, because I'll know your heart wants it as much as your body does, and I'll give you all of me, not pieces, not pressure. Her throat tightened. No one had ever told her that before. Most men rushed in, then disappeared just as fast, leaving her to put herself back together. But Dallas? He was different. You always say things like that? She asked, half teasing, trying not to fall too fast. He smirked. Only when I mean them. They kept walking. Later, as they sat on a bench near a small park, kids playing in the distance, she leaned against his side. Have you always been this slow? She asked. He chuckled. I used to be fast, too fast. That's why I slowed down. She looked up at him. What changed? He met her eyes. I lost someone who deserved better. Dion felt that in her chest. Not jealousy, not worry, just truth. You won't lose me, she said, as long as you keep showing up like this. He took her hand. Then I won't stop. And right there, on that worn-down bench with nothing dramatic or flashy, Dion believed him, not because he said the right things, but because he said them with no agenda and followed them with presence. 3 nights later, Dion's apartment held a different kind of quiet. It wasn't emptiness, but familiarity. The sofa cushions wore the shape of where he sat. The candles she'd lit earlier still held a faint scent of vanilla and warmth. Dion sat at the window reading a paper and sipping chamomile tea, her face soft in the glow of streetlights. Her phone vibrated quietly on the table. It was him. Coming over? Dallas. She paused, considered the moment. Past nights had been careful, present, paced. But tonight, she wanted rest. She wanted surrender. She typed back, yes. There was something lovely and deliberate in that simple acceptance. Minutes later, he knocked. Soft, intentional. She opened the door to shirtless shoulders and caring eyes. He stepped inside like he'd always belonged. No grand gesture, no dramatic entrance, just presence. They sat together in the living room, the lamp casting gentle shadows. She wore a loose gray tee, he, simple joggers. No frills, no pretense, just calm. They didn't speak at first. His gaze took in the room, books, pillows, the quiet energy she had built to protect herself. Then he looked at her. You okay? He asked, voice low. She nodded. But he didn't move closer, didn't push, waited. There was something unspoken, something weighty yet gentle. Time stretched. Finally she whispered, Stay. He did, and that waiting, unrushed, centered, laid the groundwork for what came next. Dion moved through her space differently that night. She wasn't performing. She wasn't guarding herself. She moved with ease, barefoot soft steps on the hardwood, her natural curls pulled into a loose puff. Her skin glowed without effort, and her eyes didn't dodge his. Not once. Dallas sat on the edge of the couch, his forearms resting on his knees, watching her. Quietly, respectfully, she turned toward him, holding a fresh glass of water. You want something else? She asked. He shook his head. Only if you do. She smiled. It was the kind of smile women give when they've made a decision, not out of pressure, but peace. Dion sat beside him. Not across, not at a distance. Beside, close. Her leg brushed his. He didn't flinch or lean in. He let her control the gravity between them. You always sit like that? She teased, tilting her head. He chuckled. Like what? Like you're afraid to relax. He leaned back slowly, exhaling. I'm trying to give you space. She nodded. You don't have to try that hard. The words lingered. She reached for his hand, fingers cool, palm warm. She traced the lines there like she was reading them. Did you ever think, she said, you'd meet someone like this? Dallas looked at her. Not like this, no. Their hands stayed locked, not in tension, but comfort. She leaned into his side, and he adjusted naturally, one arm wrapping around her, the other still holding her hand. I thought I had to prove myself to be worthy of this, she whispered. He looked down at her. You don't. You never did. Silence returned, but not awkwardly. This was a different silence. A shared one. A safe one. She rested her head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady. They didn't kiss. Not yet. There was no rush to cross that line, because the intimacy wasn't in their bodies touching. It was in the way they didn't need anything else in that moment. She was fully herself. He saw all of her, and neither flinched. When she finally looked up and met his gaze, he wasn't smiling, but his eyes were warm, open. Dion inhaled softly. "I want you to stay, but I need you to promise me something." "Name it," he said. "That you'll still look at me like this tomorrow." He didn't answer with words. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it, slow, with intention. "You'll see," he said, and with that, something shifted between them. Not a spark, but a door, quietly opening. The TV murmured in the background, but neither of them was watching. Dallas sat still, his hand resting on Dion's thigh, light, respectful, waiting. Her legs were folded beneath her, body angled toward him. No one moved. No one had to. There was no pressure in the air, no game of push and pull, just a question lingering without being asked yet. He leaned in, slow, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Dion," he said, his voice barely above a breath. Her eyes met his instantly. "If I kiss you now," he whispered, "would you let me?" She didn't blink. Her lips parted slightly. "Yes." Still, he didn't rush. He searched her expression, wanted to be sure. "Because I want this," he said. "But I won't take anything you're not ready to give." Her hands moved up to his chest, warm and steady. "I'm ready." It wasn't just consent, it was clarity. It was trust. He moved closer, their noses brushing. Then finally, his lips touched hers. Not hungry, not urgent, just full of the slow-burning desire that had been simmering for weeks. She kissed him back, matching his rhythm. It wasn't a show, it was a conversation, wordless but loud. He deepened the kiss only when she pulled him closer. She moaned softly, not from lust alone, but from how seen she felt. He didn't kiss her like she was fragile. He kissed her like she was real, strong, worth savoring. When their lips parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Her fingers still curled into the front of his shirt. "That felt right?" he asked. She nodded. They stayed close, breathing the same air. No fireworks, no chaos, just presence. Dallas brushed a hand along her jaw. "If I touch you more, you'll stop me when you need to." "Only if I need to," she said. "But I don't think I will." His hand moved to her waist, gripping gently. Her body leaned into his like it had been waiting its whole life to belong somewhere. To someone. Dion had been kissed before. But this was the first time she'd been asked to be kissed. And the first time she said yes, not because of wine or charm or fear of regret, but because the moment had earned it. He didn't lift her like in the movies. He didn't pin her against walls or rip her shirt off. Dallas stood slowly and extended his hand. "Come with me." Dion slid her fingers into his. They walked silently through the hallway toward her room. The soft thud of their feet on the wooden floor, the only sound. Inside, her bed was made. Not perfectly, but honestly. Tossed pillows, warm sheets, one book open on the nightstand. She climbed in without a word, shifting to the center of the mattress. Dallas didn't follow immediately. He stood there, looking at her, not with hunger, but with depth. "I want you to know," he said, pulling his shirt over his head. "This isn't something I take lightly." "I know," Dion whispered, pulling the sheets back. He joined her. The bed creaked quietly. Their bodies aligned under the dim light of the small bedside lamp. No music, no distractions, just them. Dallas leaned in and kissed her again. This time, he took his time. His hand moved from her waist to her hip, to her thigh. Everything with care. She let her hands explore his back, her fingertips tracing along his spine. He was solid, muscle and warmth, but it wasn't his body that made her feel safe. It was how patient he was, how steady. He paused as he peeled her shirt over her head, looked into her eyes, searching. "You okay?" "Yes," she said, meaning it. He kissed her collarbone, then her shoulder, as if learning each part of her like a language. His hands didn't rush. His mouth didn't devour. He studied her, honored her. And when he finally moved between her legs, asking again, quietly, just with his eyes, she nodded, her breath shaking but sure. The first entry was slow, measured. He held her hips, his thumb stroking her skin as they adjusted together. She gasped once, softly, but didn't pull away. Instead, she pulled him closer. They moved in rhythm, uncoordinated at first, but then fluid, as if their bodies had known this dance long before tonight. No commands, no noise for the sake of it, only breathing, only feeling. She wrapped her arms around his neck, eyes fluttering closed. Dallas kissed her cheek, her ear, her temple, holding her like something sacred. And when he finally came, he didn't groan or curse. He held her tighter, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "Thank you," as if he knew she hadn't just shared her body. She'd shared her story. They didn't roll over and fall asleep. They didn't rush to clean up or joke awkwardly. Instead, Dallas reached for the blanket and gently covered Dion's bare shoulder. His fingers smoothed along her arm, tender and slow. She was still catching her breath, lips parted, eyes wide with emotion more than exertion. He looked at her like he wasn't finished seeing her yet. Not her body. Her. Dion turned slightly, resting on her side. Her arm draped across his chest. His skin was warm, heartbeat steady beneath her hand. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You okay?" She nodded, but her throat caught. No one had asked her that after, not ever. Not with sincerity, not with softness. Dallas stroked her hair, then moved his hand down to her lower back. "You didn't have to give me that." She looked up, puzzled. "Give you what?" "That part of you. That trust." His voice cracked just a little. "You didn't take anything, Dallas. You earned it." A small smile tugged at his lips. Not smug, grateful. He pulled her closer. Their legs tangled, skin warm against skin. But the room didn't feel charged with leftover heat. It felt full. "I don't want this to be something we look back on and pretend didn't happen," he said. "It won't be." "You sure? Are you?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied. She studied him for a long second. He wasn't giving a performance. He wasn't looking for the next thrill. He was present, emotionally awake. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. "You make me feel like I'm not too much," she said, voice low. He turned to her, eyes serious. "You're not too much. You're everything." She blinked hard. They lay there, quiet again, but not distant. Their silence was a conversation of its own. He didn't grab his phone. He didn't turn away. He ran his fingers along her arm, over her wrist, then gently kissed the inside of it. "You don't have to rush to define anything," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Dion smiled, buried her face in his neck, and exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. For the first time in years, she believed it. The night didn't end after their first time. It paused. It softened. Their bodies rested, but the pull between them didn't loosen. It thickened, like gravity. Dion lay with her head on Dallas's chest, eyes closed, fingers tracing lazy lines along his ribs. Dallas had one hand behind his head, the other around her waist. He hadn't stopped touching her since the first time. Not in a possessive way, just steady, grounding. "I thought I'd be more nervous," she whispered. "You weren't?" "Not with you." His hand stilled, pressing gently into her skin. "Good. That's all I ever wanted, for you to feel safe." She shifted upward, meeting his gaze again. "Do you feel safe?" he asked, then chuckled softly. "I feel home." That word hit her in the center of her chest. Their lips met again, slower this time. Not cautious, but more deliberate. Like the first kiss had opened a door, and now they were walking through it, together. Dion rolled onto him. Dallas's hands gripped her hips instinctively, but he paused. "You sure?" She kissed his neck. "I'm not just sure. I want this." That was all he needed. He shifted her gently beneath him, their bodies already familiar now, but still full of wonder. This time, the heat started slow. Their movements were less uncertain, more rhythm, more breath, more knowing. He moved inside her again, and they both sighed at the contact. But this time, it wasn't about discovery. It was about depth, about presence. Dallas kissed her with intent, not fire. His eyes stayed open, watching her, memorizing every expression. Dion clung to him, not out of fear or need, but because she wanted to, because it felt right to be held by someone who wasn't pretending. She spoke his name in a low voice that made him groan softly, not loud, not performative, just real. He responded with a whisper of her own name, and when their hands found each other's, fingers locked tight, the room felt still, like nothing else existed. Their pace slowed, lengthened. Dallas rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mixing, sweat beading at his temple. Neither one wanted it to end. When he finally released again, it wasn't with intensity, it was with closeness. His body shuddered softly, and he kissed her shoulder as if anchoring himself back to her. They didn't speak for a while, but they didn't need to. Dion lay against him, heart full, not just from the way he moved, but from the way he stayed. The second time left them both still and quiet. Dion rested with her back against Dallas's chest, his arm around her waist, their fingers laced. Rain tapped gently on the window, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The city was hushed, like the world outside understood not to interrupt. Dallas kissed the back of her shoulder. "You good?" She turned her head slightly, smiling. "I'm more than good." He held her a little tighter, not wanting the moment to slip. But he felt something too, a shift, the kind that made a man want to say something, even when it scared him. She caught it, the subtle tension in his arm, the way his fingers paused mid-stroke on her hip. "What?" she asked softly. He took a breath. "I don't want to mess this up," he said. "You matter too much." She blinked, lips parting. "Dallas." He didn't let her finish. "I know people say don't fall like it's a warning," he whispered. "But I'm not afraid of you falling." He moved his hand up to her jaw, turning her gently so they were face to face again. His voice dropped even lower. "Don't fall," he said. "Let me meet you where you are." Her eyes filled with something unspoken. Not fear, not confusion, just understanding. "Meet me," she echoed, halfway, whole way. "Wherever you are, Dion." She touched his chest. "No man's ever said that to me." He kissed her again, this time on her cheek, then her jaw, then just beside her lips. That's because they weren't listening. She inhaled deeply. "I don't want to be a story you tell later. You won't be. Don't say it if you're not sure." "I'm not saying it," he replied. "I'm showing it. Every day after this, I'll show it." Dion searched his face. Every line, every crease. His honesty didn't come in waves. It came in presence, in warmth. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. But you're still here. I'm not going anywhere," he said. "So, if you're gonna fall, just know I'm already standing right here." She kissed him this time. Not slow, not fast, just certain. They curled into each other again, not because of the cold, but because closeness wasn't a luxury, it was necessary. Dallas stroked her spine gently as her eyes closed. "You don't have to fall," he whispered one last time. "I already did," she murmured back, just before sleep pulled her under. They didn't move fast. They moved real. Dallas didn't come with loud declarations or timelines. Dion didn't ask for labels. What grew between them happened without announcement. It wasn't explosive. It was steady. Their days started blending. Some mornings, Dion would wake up in her apartment, reach over, and his arm would already be there. Other times, she'd find herself in his penthouse, curled under soft white sheets, while he made her eggs just the way she liked. He never made a big deal of it. Neither did she. They were simply together. Dion's toothbrush showed up next to his without a conversation. His cologne sat on her dresser without explanation. Their clothes ended up in the same hamper. Groceries? They did it together. Her oat milk, his protein bars. Their lives braided into one without even noticing when the strand began. It was peaceful. Dallas didn't interrupt her peace. He added to it. When she needed silence, he gave her space. When she needed arms, he opened them without question. At night, they'd lie on the couch, her legs over his lap, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw. Sometimes they'd talk about nothing. Other times, she'd tell him stories about growing up in Georgia, how her mom used to braid her hair on Sunday nights before school. Dallas listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her memories or insert himself into them. He just made room for them. One night, while she was cooking pasta barefoot in his kitchen, he walked up behind her, wrapped, his arms around her waist, and whispered, "You look like you've always belonged here." She smiled. "I feel like I do." That was how it was. Not forced. Not planned. Organic. On Sundays, he'd read by the window while she played soul music and danced around in his oversized hoodie. On Mondays, she'd bring him lunch at his office, sometimes with a sticky note that read, "For the sexiest man in finance." He blushed every time. They made love without urgency. Sometimes it was intense. Sometimes it was slow. Sometimes it was just curling up and holding each other as the world outside spun. Dallas learned her moods by her silence. Dion learned his stress by how long he stared at his laptop. They didn't need instructions. They just paid attention. And when the world outside got too loud, they shut the door and made their own. One night, as they lay in bed, Dion whispered, "I've never had something this soft." Dallas kissed her shoulder. "Then we'll protect it together." And they did. Not because they had to, because neither of them knew how to live without it anymore. Dallas Kane lived by routine. Before Dion, every morning looked the same. Wake at 5:30. Gym by 6. Protein shake, black coffee, email, strategy call, rinse, repeat. He liked order. Predictability gave him control. Control made him feel safe. Dion? She was the opposite. She loved to interrupt, not in chaos, but in color. The first time she broke his routine, she showed up at his office with 2 blueberry muffins and no warning. He was in a meeting. She didn't care. "Tell your assistant you've been kidnapped," she said, stepping into his glass-walled office like she owned the building. He blinked. "What?" 15-minute muffin break. Doctor's orders. He stared at her, then at the muffins, then back at her grin. He dismissed the meeting. From that day on, she made room in his routine. Slowly, gently, she started slipping love notes in his briefcase. One time he opened his tablet case at a board meeting and found a note that read, "Don't be too serious. You're still mine under all that suit." He cleared his throat, trying not to smile as the other board members looked confused. He began waking up later, letting the gym wait, making time for breakfast together. She brought flowers just because. Sometimes she stole his t-shirts, wore them to bed, and laughed when he pretended to be mad. Dion danced in the kitchen with loud music while he reviewed earnings reports. She made fun of his playlists. He pretended not to enjoy it when she sang 90 seconds R&B off-key, twirling in socks on the marble floors. Dallas started leaving work earlier, started asking her opinion on business decisions. He built her a reading nook in his penthouse, bought her favorite teas without asking, sent her articles about things she once mentioned in passing, like black-owned art galleries and mid-century furniture. He noticed everything. She responded with touch. When he was tired, she ran her fingers through his hair. When he was overwhelmed, she climbed into his lap and kissed his forehead. When he forgot to take breaks, she pulled him into bed and laid on his chest until he stopped thinking. They became rhythm and pause, order and surprise. One morning, he stepped into the kitchen and saw she had rearranged everything in his pantry. She stood there, hands on her hips. "You need more flavor in your life." Dallas blinked at the unfamiliar spice rack. "Is this turmeric?" She walked past him and kissed his cheek. "It's love." He smiled. "I thought love was chili flakes." "It's that too." He didn't correct her. He didn't fix the pantry. He left it exactly how she placed it. Because her disruption didn't unsettle him. It softened him. She filled in his edges with warmth. And he made space for every part of her. Dallas Kane had access to every luxury known to man. He could have shut down Central Park and proposed under fireworks. He could have flown Dion to Paris, arranged a string quartet, had the Eiffel Tower behind them lit in gold. But none of that felt like them. They weren't loud. They were steady. Dallas had the ring for 3 weeks before he even told her he loved her. That's how much the words meant to him. That's how deeply he respected what they had. He waited, watched, listened, and one Saturday morning, he knew. They had spent the night at Dion's place. She was still asleep, her curls wild on the pillow, one leg over his hip, her hand tucked under his shirt. He didn't move. He just looked at her. She didn't wear makeup to bed. She didn't try to look perfect. She just was, and he couldn't imagine waking up any other way. He carefully slipped from under her arm, tiptoed to her kitchen and made coffee. Then he sat at her table with a pen and a blank note card. He wrote, "I don't want perfect. I want ours," folded it, slid the ring inside the envelope. No speech, no pressure. When she came out later, still in his t-shirt, rubbing her eyes, he handed it to her. "What's this?" "Something I should have said the night we met." She opened it slowly, read the note, looked at the ring, then back at him. Tears hit her eyes before words did. Are you... Dallas stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm asking if I can stay exactly where you already let me in." Dion laughed through her tears. You're serious? He nodded once. She looked down at the ring. It's not even in a box. It's in a promise. She didn't say yes. She jumped into his arms. He held her, tight, spinning once in that tiny kitchen. No photographers? She teased. Nope. No rooftop restaurant? Nope. No viral video? Just us. She kissed him. Good. Because this is what I wanted all along. Dallas slipped the ring on her finger. No audience. No performance. Just him and her. Quiet. Real. She held up her hand, the sunlight catching the diamond. Then she looked him in the eye. I don't want perfect either. He smiled. Then we're good. And they were. There were no chandeliers. No tuxedos. No 5-tiered cake flown in from Manhattan. Dion and Dallas stood barefoot in the grass, under a tall tree just outside Savannah, Georgia. The tree had history, twisted roots, branches that stretched like open arms, moss hanging like a soft curtain above their heads. It felt like it had waited for them, like it had seen this kind of love before. They didn't send out gold-embossed invitations. Dion texted a few names. Dallas called his mother the week before. Only 15 people stood in a half-circle around them. No crowd, just warmth. Dion wore a cream dress she found at a small black-owned boutique in Atlanta. It hugged her body gently, like it had been made just for her. Her curls were pinned loosely, with wildflowers tucked between the strands. No veil, no heels. Dallas wore linen pants and an open-collar white shirt. His sleeves were rolled up. His hands never left hers. There was no pastor in a robe, just her friend Darnell, who got ordained online because he believed in their love enough to do it. The vows weren't written in calligraphy. They were scribbled on scraps of paper, words crossed out and rewritten in the margins. But when Dion read hers, everyone cried. I didn't fall in love with what you had. I fell in love with what you kept trying to hide. And the moment you let me in, I knew I wasn't leaving. Dallas took a breath, then read his. You didn't fix me. You showed me I didn't need fixing to be worth loving. I promised to never hold you with anything but open hands. No one clapped. No music played. Just the wind, and their kiss, and silence that felt like a blessing. Afterward, they sat on picnic blankets, ate fried chicken, cornbread, and Dion's grandma's peach cobbler. They laughed, told stories, took Polaroids. No reception hall. Just grass and sun and 2 people who chose each other without spectacle. Dallas whispered to Dion during a quiet moment. If I had done this in a ballroom, would you have said no? She grinned. I would have said yes, but I would have made you take your shoes off after. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and looked around at the simple joy surrounding them. No media, no headlines, just a marriage that started the way their love had, honest, grounded, and bare. Under a tree that now held their story in its branches. Dion stared at the pregnancy test on the bathroom counter. 3 minutes hadn't passed, but the results showed fast. 2 pink lines. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She smiled. And then she opened the bathroom door and called out, Dallas? He was in the kitchen, humming to himself while slicing apples for their morning oatmeal. Yeah? He answered, not looking up. She walked in slowly and handed him the test like it was a birthday card. He took it, looked at it, then looked at her, then back at it again. And then his whole body changed. His face broke into something soft and raw. His throat tightened, his eyes welled, and without a word, he sat down at the table, both hands gripping the stick. You okay? Dion asked, stepping closer. He nodded but couldn't talk. She sat beside him. Did I break you? He laughed. Wet, messy. No. You fixed something I didn't even know was missing. Still, he didn't stop staring at the test. I've built empires, Dion, he whispered. I've signed contracts worth billions. But nothing has ever felt as permanent or as terrifying as this. You're scared? She asked, but she already knew the answer. He nodded. In the best way. She leaned into him. We're going to be okay. He turned to her, finally able to speak without shaking. I've never had a model for this. I didn't grow up watching a man stay. I watched him leave. You're staying, she said gently. You already stayed. Dallas ran a hand over her stomach and whispered, That's our baby in there? Dion smiled. You want to ask the test again? He laughed, then kissed her belly for the first time. I'm going to mess up, he murmured. She nodded. Yeah, and I'm going to correct you. He looked into her eyes, still watery but steadier now. How are you so calm? I've wanted this, she said. With you. He held the test again, like it was sacred. Dion took it from him and put it on the counter. Then she held his face in her hands. You're allowed to feel everything. Even too much. Dallas closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake beside her, one hand on her belly, the other under his head. Do you think it's a girl? He whispered. Dion turned sleepily. I think it's love, no matter who comes out. He smiled at that. And for the first time in his life, Dallas Kane, CEO, billionaire, man of control, felt undone by something he couldn't schedule, build, or predict. He felt undone by love growing quietly inside the woman who'd fallen asleep on his shoulder on a plane. The rain tapped gently against the windows of their apartment in Midtown Atlanta. Dion sat on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, wearing one of Dallas's oversized shirts. Her belly had just started to show, a soft curve beneath the cotton. She had been reading a parenting book, then closed it halfway through. Every chapter makes it sound like we'll break the baby by sneezing wrong, she said, tossing the book on the table. Dallas looked up from the floor, where he was assembling a bassinet. I think love is stronger than any mistake we'll make. She smiled. You sure? He stood and walked to her. No. But I want you to believe I am. Dion watched him as he approached. His shirt was damp with sweat, sleeves rolled up, hands dusty from the wooden parts. You build like you kiss, she said softly. How's that? Slow, focused, no shortcuts. He sat beside her, brushing a curl behind her ear. You always talk like I'm a better man than I feel. Maybe you are. The air shifted between them. He touched her face, then her belly, then her hand, and without saying a word, he stood and offered his hand. She took it. In the bedroom, there was no rush, no dramatic music, just breath and trust. He undressed her gently, taking time with every button. She looked at him, steady. Does this change things? She asked, placing his hand on her slight bump. It deepens them, he whispered. When their bodies met, it wasn't just about passion. It was about anchoring, about grounding their fears and joys into something physical. He kissed her neck slower this time. He held her tighter. She moaned, low and quiet, less from pleasure and more from being seen. He paused. You okay? She nodded. Don't stop being like this. He smiled against her skin. Like what? Present. That night their love didn't need to prove anything. It was no longer new or uncertain. It had grown roots. When it was over, they didn't say much. They just laid there, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her back. I didn't know it could feel different, Dion said. What? Making love while carrying love? Dallas blinked slowly. You're going to be so much more than a father, she whispered. You're going to be his or her safe place. He kissed her forehead. You already are mine. They didn't fall asleep right away. They stayed in that space where nothing had to be said, and everything had already been answered in the way their bodies folded into each other. The hospital room smelled of sterile sheets and soft lavender. Dion gripped the bed rails, her breath short and sharp. Dallas stood by her side, his hands shaking, though he tried to hide it. Look at me, she whispered between contractions. He looked. His eyes were wide, uncertain. Stop pacing, she added, teeth clenched. Be here. He nodded, stepped in close, and wrapped both hands around hers. I'm here, he said. I'm right here. 12 hours. That's how long labor dragged on. Dallas stayed the entire time. No phone calls, no laptop, no pacing, just holding ice chips, wiping sweat, and whispering things she could barely hear but somehow needed. When Dion screamed from the final push, he didn't flinch. He held her tighter. Then came the sound that cracked him wide open. A small, perfect cry. It's a girl, the nurse said. Dion laughed through tears. I told you. Dallas couldn't speak. He stared as the baby was cleaned and wrapped. The nurse handed her to Dion first, but Dion shook her head gently and turned toward him. She needs to meet you first, she whispered. Dallas reached out with trembling arms. Deborah, his daughter. She was so small. Brown curls matted down, lips puckered like she was already displeased with the world. He pressed his forehead to hers and cried. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're safe." Dion watched him. This man, the same one who once panicked at the idea of love, now held it like glass and gold. The nurse asked, "Do you want skin-to-skin, Dad?" He didn't even answer. He pulled off his shirt and held Deborah against his chest, folding his arms around her. Her tiny body calmed. "She knows you," Dion said quietly. Dallas looked up. "I've been talking to her for months." "She better." Later, when Dion was settled and Deborah had fallen asleep on his chest, he sat beside the hospital bed and said, "I think I get it now. What? Why people say they'd die for someone they just met." She smiled. "It's not about time. It's about depth." He nodded slowly. There were no grand declarations, no speeches. Just a man who had built skyscrapers, now weeping over 7 pounds of new life in his arms. He kissed Deborah's head, then looked at Dion. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For doing this with me." The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in the early hours when the world is still asleep. Moonlight spilled through the nursery window, casting a soft glow on the rocking chair where Dallas sat, cradling Deborah in his arms. She was 2 weeks old, wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes closed, breathing slow. He rocked her gently, one foot nudging the floor, the other planted for balance. His shirt was stained from formula and sleep was a memory, but his heart was full. Dion stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You didn't have to get up," she whispered. He looked up. "I wanted to." She walked over, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, and sat on the armrest beside him. For a while, they said nothing, just watched their daughter's tiny chest rise and fall. "I used to think life was measured by deals, accounts, progress," he finally said. Dion rubbed his shoulder. "And now? Now it's measured by how long she holds my pinky." He looked down at Deborah's tiny fingers gripping his. "I didn't know I needed this," he added. She kissed his temple. He turned to her. "You gave me more than a child. You gave me peace. You gave me space to be soft," she whispered back. Dallas stood, still holding the baby, and laid her carefully in the crib. She stirred, but didn't wake. They walked back to their room. Dion crawled into bed. Dallas followed and pulled her close. "Do you remember what I said after our first time?" he asked. She thought. "You said, 'Don't fall. Let me meet you where you are.'" He nodded, voice low. "You let me meet you, over and over again. Even when I didn't know how to show up." She looked up at him, her face lit by the soft hallway light. "You did show up, every time." Dallas cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "You're everything," he whispered. "Thank you." Dion didn't cry. She breathed. She sank into the safety of that moment, into the man who had once been a stranger on a plane and was now her home. He turned off the light. Their fingers intertwined beneath the covers. No music, no noise, just the sound of a peaceful house, a baby's soft sigh in the distance, and two people who had chosen each other, fully, completely, without hesitation. The morning started slow now. Dion liked it that way. No alarms, no rushed coffee, no packed bags at the door. Just the sound of birds outside and the smell of maple syrup drifting from the kitchen. Dallas had made pancakes again. He always shaped Deborah's into animals, this time a bear with banana slice eyes. She clapped when she saw it. "Mama, Daddy made a bear face." She beamed, syrup already on her fingers. Dion smiled, leaning on the kitchen doorway. Her silk robe hung open just enough to let warmth in, her hair wrapped in a soft scarf. Dallas glanced at her. "I tried for a cat," he said. Dion grinned. "Well, it's a delicious bear." Deborah giggled and swung her feet from the chair. Their house wasn't a mansion, but it didn't need to be. The walls held warmth. The photos on the fridge told stories. Their laundry basket stayed full, but so did their hearts. Most days were spent barefoot. Music played low. Sometimes jazz, sometimes Deborah's cartoon songs. Evenings belonged to the porch. A rocking chair. A blanket. Her head on his shoulder. Laughter from inside. Sometimes silence. There was no rush to be anywhere. No loud drama. No burning passion filled with regret. Just consistency. Dallas washed dishes while Dion folded Deborah's clothes. They kissed before bed and touched each other with the ease of two people who knew what made the other feel safe. Love wasn't a grand gesture. It was the grocery runs, the way he turned her side of the pillow, the way she left him voice notes during errands. They didn't chase peace anymore. They lived in it. Dion never had to wonder if Deborah felt loved. She saw it every day, etched into the way Dallas watched their daughter like she was made of stardust and stories. He didn't talk too much, but his actions roared. He braided her hair slowly each morning, tongue between his lips in concentration, as if each twist held a prayer. When she cried, he never shushed her. He crouched down, eye level, and listened until her storm passed. He read to her every night, even when his voice cracked from long meetings. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and just watch her sleep, whispering, "She's magic." And when she fell asleep in his arms, he wouldn't move for hours, not even to turn off the lamp. Dion watched him from the hallway sometimes, just watched. There was something about seeing a man so strong be so soft, with no audience, that made her chest tighten in the best way. He was her husband, but with Deborah, he became something more. Not a hero, not a protector, a mirror. He gave their daughter space to feel everything. He taught her it was okay to be loud, to be bright, to ask questions. He answered them with patience, even when she asked the same thing 3 times in a row. "Daddy, why do you love Mama?" He smiled. "Because she sees all of me and never runs." Dion's throat caught when she heard that. Dallas never needed to raise his voice to lead. He parented like he loved, steady, quiet, full of presence. That was how kings ruled, by making those around them feel safe. And their daughter? She never flinched. She never second-guessed love, because her father had already shown her what it looked like. Deborah had a mind of her own. At 4, she already knew what dress matched what sandals, and no one could convince her otherwise. Not even Dion, who tried once and got a 10-minute lecture about fashion rules for princesses. Dallas had chuckled quietly in the hallway. "She's you," he whispered to Dion. "No," Dion whispered back. "She's better." Deborah was bold, always asking why. Why the sky changed color. Why some kids had more toys. Why Mama cried during old love songs. She didn't just accept the world, she studied it. And she challenged it. She once corrected a cashier on the capital of Montana. "It's Helena, not Billings. I saw it in my book." The cashier laughed and gave her a sticker. Her preschool teacher called her a force. Dion called her a storm wrapped in glitter. But Deborah had a soft side too. She hugged strangers in the park. She picked wildflowers for Dion after school. She told Dallas every night, "You're the best daddy in the whole wide daddy planet." She called Dion her shiny queen and Dallas her muscle marshmallow. Sometimes Dion just watched her from the doorway, bossing her dolls around, organizing her books by color, humming songs to herself. Beautiful didn't begin to cover her. It was the confidence, the joy, the spark. She looked like Dion but carried Dallas's quiet depth. She was curious, kind, and had no problem saying what she needed. "I'm not sleepy," she'd pout. "You don't have to be," Dallas would reply. "But we can rest." She always ended up asleep 5 minutes later. Bossy, brilliant, beautiful. That was Deborah. And every day, she reminded them that love, when planted right, grows wild and bold and absolutely unforgettable. Dion stood in the bathroom with the test in her hand. 2 lines, clear as day. She sat on the closed toilet lid, both hands gripping the edges of the counter. Her heart thudded, not out of fear, but out of something she hadn't felt since Deborah was born. A quiet joy, the kind that makes you pause before smiling. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same full lips, same thick curls tied up high. But her eyes, they shimmered different now. She was carrying life again. And Dallas didn't know yet. Not because she was scared to tell him. No. Dallas had never given her reason to doubt his love. He loved with both hands. He listened with his whole face. He kissed her stomach after long days, even when there was nothing there but butterflies and dinner. But this time, she wanted the moment to be right. Not loud, not rushed, just theirs. Deborah was down for her nap. Dallas was outside, sweeping the porch. The late afternoon sun spilled across the hardwood like honey. Everything felt soft, perfect. She slid the test into the drawer, then placed her hand on her stomach. "I got you," she whispered. Later that evening, as Dallas came in smelling like wind and pine, she watched him from the kitchen. He kissed her cheek. Warm, slow. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, better than okay." He didn't ask more. He never pushed. And that made it even easier to fall for him again, every single time. Dion smiled to herself as she stirred the pot of soup. She had a secret, but it wouldn't stay a secret for long. And when she told him, she knew his reaction would remind her why choosing him was never a mistake. The porch light buzzed faintly above them. The sky had turned violet, brushed with the last breath of daylight. Cicadas hummed. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler kicked on. Dallas leaned back in the wooden chair, his feet crossed at the ankle, a blanket draped over his lap. Dion walked out barefoot, her cardigan slipping from one shoulder. She held 2 mugs, chamomile for her, black tea for him. He smiled when she handed it to him. "Thanks, baby." She sat beside him and tucked herself close, thigh to thigh. The wood beneath them creaked in rhythm with the breeze. For a while, they didn't talk. They didn't need to. Deborah's toys were scattered in the grass. The stars blinked overhead. The night was slow, quiet, honest. Dion shifted slightly, her heartbeat quick in her chest. She placed her mug on the porch rail, then reached for his hand. Dallas looked at her. She didn't speak, just lifted his hand gently, turned it palm down, and placed it right over her belly. His eyes flickered. He didn't move. The silence deepened, long, whole, and then his jaw clenched, his eyes welled. His thumb instinctively stroked her stomach. He blinked quickly, but the tears came anyway. He opened his mouth, closed it again. She watched him breathe through it. One inhale, one exhale, like the truth had wrapped around his spine. "You're sure?" he whispered. She nodded, her own eyes glassy. He kissed her, not her lips, but her forehead, then her cheek, then her belly. They sat like that, unmoving, for what felt like an hour, wrapped in quiet, wrapped in love, wrapped in the kind of gratitude that has no words, only presence. Dallas didn't say much after. He didn't need to. His hand stayed on her belly like it was the most fragile, sacred thing he'd ever held. His thumb moved in slow circles, protective, careful, present. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. Dion leaned her head against his shoulder. He kissed the top of her hair and held her tighter. There was no panic, no rush, only awe, the kind that hits you when life whispers instead of shouts. He closed his eyes and said one thing. "Thank you." Not loud, not shaky, just full of emotion, full of disbelief, full of a love he had no blueprint for, but followed anyway. She smiled softly. "You're welcome." They stayed there until the crickets started singing louder, until the world fell away, until it was just the 3 of them, her, him, and the tiny heartbeat growing inside. "I didn't want to tell you in a big way," Dion murmured. "I wanted it to be quiet, real, like us." Dallas nodded. "I love you for that," he said. Another pause, another breath. Then, "You're going to be an incredible father again," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes shining. "Only because I have you beside me." They didn't talk much more that night. They didn't need to. Some moments don't require words, just honesty, just presence, just gratitude. And Dallas Kane, a man who once said little and felt too much, let it all show. Not through speeches or grand gestures, but through stillness, through a look, through a tear he didn't hide. That was his way of saying everything. The stars had fully taken over the sky. Dallas leaned back in the porch chair, hand still wrapped around Dion's. He looked up, taking in the sky like it held secrets he finally understood. Dion turned to him. "What are you thinking?" He paused, then said, "Peace isn't earned. It's a person." She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned toward her. "I spent most of my life thinking I had to achieve peace, buy it, build it, win it, like it was something waiting at the end of success." He ran a hand through his hair, voice quiet. "But peace was always a person. You—" Her chest tightened. "Dallas, I sleep like a man who stopped running," he continued. "I wake up without flinching. I don't hide anymore, not from myself, not from what I want, and that's because of you." Dion didn't cry, but her heart swelled, pressed against her ribs like it was trying to say something too. She looked at him, seeing everything he didn't say, the pain he had released, the softness he had grown into, the peace he hadn't chased, but had found. In her. Dallas pulled her hand to his lips. You're my home, Dion. You've always been. No grand speeches, no poetry, just the truth, simple and raw. She leaned into him again, letting silence speak louder than any vow. The porch light buzzed gently above. Their daughter slept inside. A new child grew within her, and the man beside her had finally found what he didn't know he needed. Not perfection, not glory, but peace in human form. The wind shifted slightly, brushing Dion's hair back as she looked out into the night. Inside, Deborah's soft humming, likely singing to her stuffed animals, floated through the open window. Dallas rested his hand on Dion's belly, unmoving, but warm, present. He kissed her shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on whatever this is. She smiled. You don't have to thank me. I chose this. He leaned back, surprised. Chose? Yes, she said, turning to face him fully. I didn't fall in love with you, Dallas. Falling sounds like a mistake, like I tripped, but I didn't. She reached for his cheek, her thumb brushing over the faint stubble. I saw you. I watched you be gentle with me. I watched how you never pushed, how you listened, how you let me unfold on my own terms. She took a breath. And with every moment, I chose to keep showing up. To love you, not because it was easy or romantic, but because it was real. And you never made me question that. Dallas's eyes brimmed. He held them back, but Dion saw it. She smiled. So no, I didn't fall. I stepped forward, again and again. And I still choose you. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing his face into her neck. And in that quiet moment, on a porch, in a peaceful neighborhood, in the middle of a simple life, they stayed. No background music, no audience, just a woman who chose love, and a man who met her where she stood. If this story reminded you that love doesn't need drama to be real, type "peace is a person" in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful love stories from Mr. Peterson Long Stories.